we should always assume that somebody is going to misunderstand what we're saying. Not because they're stupid or evil. It's because we're distracted. We often listen selectively. We may have completely different definition of terms. And our job as communicators is to ameliorate that up front by simplifying all the time and trying to make it clear to people.
Helping you create loyal customers and loyal employees, all through the power of simplicity. This is the Simple Brand Podcast, now heard around the world, including Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. I'm your host, Matt Lyles, and this week I'm talking with the king of clarity, Steve Woodruff. Steve's a consultant and author who's helped thousands of professionals with their communication strategy and messaging. At the core of Steve's teaching is how to communicate clearly and effectively. Now, if you've been listening to the Simple Brand Podcast for a while, then you know one of the best areas to focus on in delivering a simple experience to others is in your communication. Whether they're your customers, your team members, your leadership, or even your spouse or your kids. The people you're trying to communicate to live in a noisy, distracting, and complicated world. Their brains are already overloaded. So you've got to be able to break through all that noise and grab and hold their attention. And the key to grab that attention is by providing clarity. Steve's Clarity Fuel formula, rules, and tools will help you ensure that you communicate with clarity every single time. So here it is. Here's my interview with Steve Woodruff. Hey, Steve. Welcome to the show.
Matt, it's great to be here. Thanks for subjecting yourself and your audience to me.
Yeah, well, I am happy to do this. I'm happy for us to finally meet. We live, 15 miles from each other? And so Now's our chance to finally meet.
Yeah, it's great how many talented people are in this area of Middle Tennessee. The entrepreneurs, the authors, the podcasters, the musicians. It's a cornucopia of unbelievable people. And I've been here for 9 years, and I just can't believe I just keep meeting all these layers of great people.
Absolutely. I have loved that. I've gotten to be friends with some really phenomenal people, phenomenal thinkers, people similar to me who have similar thoughts and ideas to myself. So it's fun to be able to meet and hang out with friends locally and just kind of geek out over the types of subjects that we geek out about. One of those being simplicity and clarity.
Yeah, there's a few of us that are on that train and beating that drum. And I'm always glad to talk to somebody else that really understands how important that is, particularly in this very noisy age we live in.
Yeah. And so you've released your second book, The Point, to help us combat that.
Right. The first book in 2018, Clarity Wins, was focused more on branding and networking and referrals. So it's more of the outgoing, simple, clear message. Clarity's always been the major thrust. But I knew even when I released that book that there was a bigger picture of clear communications that encompassed everything, not just marketing, not just branding, but all sales, all collaboration, all project management, everything. So I've been working since then on developing a simple single formula that I call the Clarity Fuel formula. And that's what this book contains. A handbook for anybody to learn to be simple and effective in any form of communication.
You know me. I love simplicity. That's my love language. So I was excited to see it and excited to see how you simplified it in the framework. And you're right. Yes, a lot of times our audience is primarily business leaders, but this book really is for anybody that communicates to anybody else.
Well, that was the thing that was driving me. I would look at, people would have a sales formula, a marketing formula, a recipe for social media, all these different forms that were sort of specific to a certain type of industry or a certain type of exercise. And underneath it all, I kept thinking, you know what? this is all human beings. This is human beings exchanging words and ideas between brains. There's got to be something common here. That's what I've sought to distill in this book, is something that actually any one of 8 billion human beings could pick up, read, and say, oh, that's how you do that. Yeah. So yes, you're right. Business is primarily where I've done my work, you've done your work, and business leaders are often the ones that are going to plant the flag about communications. But in fact, the need is absolutely universal.
It is. For as long as I've been here, and I'm able to look back at other material media content and see how people have communicated in the past, to me, it seems like there's always been some people who are able to communicate and get their point across really well. Some people struggle with that. But I'm curious, do you think it's more difficult today for people to be heard and understood?
It is, only because the volume of noise and information is so much greater. So the mechanics of communicating are really the same and always have been.
Right.
But the number of channels, the number of screens, the amount of information, what I basically call the noise, is exponentially increasing all the time. So that means we have, as humans and as companies and as brands, a growing challenge. How do you rise above that? How do you stand up over that? Because quite frankly, there are a million distractions, and most of them are way more interesting than me. And most of them you can hold in your hand in a mobile device. So that's what we're up against. We're up against everything, not just one company that we said is our competitor. Everything's our competitor.
That's right. As it relates to customer experience, that's one of the lessons that I teach business leaders is you shouldn't be focusing on just your competitor. Like, you have other competitors that you're not aware of. And that's what you talk about in your book too, is that when it comes to communication, your direct competitor isn't necessarily your competition.
Yeah, I think part of the simplicity that I arrived at with this is, if we have one competition, that's the noise. We also have one customer. That's the human brain, because our message always arrives at somebody's brain. And if that brain has a known operating system and likes information in a certain way, well, you got to know your customer, right? I mean, that's been drilled into you forever. You know about customer experience, and you got to know your customer.
Right.
Well, what happens is, unless we know how the brain works and how it wants information, we're going to throw words at it, but we may not be communicating. So if we can simply understand what our real competition is and understand who our real customer is, we're way ahead of the game at becoming great communicators.
Jumping right into the brain and the operating system and how the brain works. As I was reading the book, I started thinking about one of the best lessons that I learned in my career was whenever I was wanting to get buy-in from an executive, whether it was for a job interview or even just to get them on board and provide either investment or support in whatever work I was leading, I knew that I needed to get on that executive's assistant's good side first.
Correct.
I needed to make sure that that assistant was able to say to that executive, yes, you should listen to Matt Lyles. I will connect you with him. And that would help in getting buy-in from them. And so it sounds like every single one of us in our brain has that same executive assistant with the RAS.
The reticular activating system. Yeah, the reticular activating system is the gatekeeper. It is the master filter. What most people don't know about their brains, because we live here in our heads and we don't even think about it, is our brains are processing about 11 million bits of information per second from all 5 senses. There is a torrent of information and stimulus coming into the brain, and we're not conscious of it at all, because the executive, the gatekeeper, the RAS, the reticular activating system, its job is to focus. Its job is to find what's the most important, relevant thing right now. And focus, when you and I are talking like this, focus is a 60 bit per second transaction flow, 60 bits. Attention and focus is a 60 bit battle, and we have 11 million bits of competition. So what does that RAS want? And that's what we were talking about with the operating system. What's the key? Well, the fact is the RAS wants something very simple. Here's another acronym, WIIFM. What's in it for me? The filter, the golden filter of attention and focus is what's in it for me, which means we've got to very quickly in all of our communications start with relevance for the audience. Start with something interesting, new, striking, high stakes, important. This is extremely foundational for any communicator because we only have a few seconds to gain attention. And if people aren't getting the point right away, if the executive assistant isn't saying, hey, you need to talk to Matt, they're onto something else. There's 11 million others knocking on the door.
There's all that noise, and they're trying to figure out, okay, like which noise do I actually even want to pay attention to?
The RAS is really, it's a neurobiological marvel. I mean, we don't even know it's there. Most people have never heard of it. It's been working since we were infants and doing this incredible work of filtering and helping us to focus. And it's magic. It's just magic. Every time I think about it, it just astounds me that there's that little tiny function in my head that is able to decide what matters and then help me focus on it.
I don't know, like how much of that goes back to our survival mindset and the brain survival mindset of like, what are the things that I need to pay attention to in order for me to survive? And so a lot of times it's, if your brain is scanning everything around you and everything looks normal, well, then, yeah, everything's okay. All is good. But then if there's something different, there's something different right here in this room, I'm going to hone in on that. Is that something that I need to pay attention to? Is that something that's going to help or hurt me?
That's exactly right. The RAS is actually a big pattern matching machine. So when we're looking out at the world, if everything looks the same, I don't need to pay attention to it. So I'm looking in my office, everything's where it belongs, doesn't matter. If a saber-toothed tiger walked into my office door, I'd be focused. I'd be paying attention. That's relevant. That's
pretty relevant.
It's not matching the patterns at all. So part of what the RAS is doing, because it's impossible to think about all this stuff, is if all the stuff is floating around and it really just kind of fits into a normal pattern, we don't need to mess with it. We only need to mess with what's new, what's relevant, what's coming down the pike now that actually seems to break the pattern or introduce a new idea. Or in this case, a threat.
Right. And those are ways that are RAS friendly, so to speak.
RAS friendly.
Yeah.
I use the term RAS friendly and brain friendly. So our goal as communicators is to learn to be brain friendly. We have to know the rules. And that first rule is you got to get through the gatekeeper. Yeah. So you've got to quickly get to relevance. Now, you've been around for a while, so you know the statistics of how long people end up on a website and click away so fast when they don't see what they want. It's milliseconds.
Yeah.
So right down to the marketing branding of a website, unless you have an extremely relevant forward message that's brain friendly, simple, easy to see, easy to digest, your website will be ignored. But that's true of presentation. That's true of an email. That's true of everything.
So what are those types of things that are not brain friendly? Those things that are brain hostile?
Confusion is one of them. If we're sitting here talking and then suddenly you broke into Spanish and I broke into Russian and we started conversing, not only are we going to confuse each other, we're going to confuse the whole audience and they're gone. Okay? Confusion is not good. The brain has enough confusion to deal with. We don't want to confuse. Part of that, and I rail on this in the book, is the overuse of jargon. We can confuse the daylights out of people when we start using, end-to-end enterprise solutions that fix business results into the KPIs of the blah, 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 blah. or just spewing nonsense, and the brain just shuts down for that. It's like, you're not telling me anything. So fog and confusion are bad. And then the biggest problem is TMI, too much information. We try to pack too much. It's overwhelming, and the brain does not want to be overwhelmed. It's already overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You're fighting 11 million bits. Why are you adding 10,000 more? We don't need huge chunks of unstructured information. We need small bits of well-structured, brain-friendly information in order to hook us.
That's it. Yeah. I talk with a number of people that will say, but if I've only got one chance, one opportunity, I'm going to take this opportunity and make sure that I tell them everything that I feel that I need to tell them. And that does a disservice.
That's the worst thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just shut them down.
If you can hook them, if you can grab their attention first and they're paying attention, then you can guide them along that information that you want them to receive, so long as it's doing in that more structured manner.
Yeah, so a typical sales pitch, people will go into, here's the background of our company, and here's the architecture of our solution, and blah, 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 blah. You've already put everybody to sleep. If you open it by saying, the vast majority of our customers have seen a 35% increase in revenue after 1 year using this automated solution, and pause.
Yeah.
Got them. Yeah. Why? I want 35% increase. Thank you very much. I want that. Yeah. That speaks to me. I'm the boss. So whatever the details are, whatever the background and all that, okay, maybe we'll get to that later. Tell me about that revenue increase, because that's what's in it for me.
You had my curiosity. Now you have my attention. What about when things go wrong? What are the results when we fail at communication? You've got some pretty funny and significant stories in the book that help drive home that point of what can go wrong.
Yeah, one of my favorites, which is highly amusing and totally horrifying at the same time, happened back in 2012 when a Russian oligarch with too many rubles on his hands decided he wanted to own a French chateau for whatever reason, egos. So he found a chateau that was empty and available in Bordeaux, France. It was a little rundown, but, certainly serviceable. And so this Russian guy contracts with a Polish construction firm to go do some work for him in France. What could go wrong?
That all makes sense.
They demolished the entire chateau, razed it to the ground, because clearly he had not gotten to the point, he had not gotten the point across, and he had not gotten them on the same page. And those are three of the four pieces of the four rules of the clarity formula. Yeah. Is you've got to get to the point, you've got to get the point across, which means you've got to arrive at shared understanding and meaning, and you ultimately want to get everyone on the same page, which is alignment and agreement and action. Yeah. The first rule, before getting to the point, is the one that's so obvious. You got to have a point.
You got to actually have a point.
You have to have a point. Those four simple rules: have a point, get right to the point, get the point across by simplifying, illustrating, and defining, and get everybody on the same page by creating the page, having a written summary of what you mean. That is the key to being a great communicator. Those four things. And whether it's a 30-second ad or a podcast or a presentation or a meeting or a book or a one-on-one coaching session, it's the same four steps.
I think it can be fairly intuitive once somebody learns, oh, yes, make sure, one, that you have a point, two, that you get to the point. That's helpful right there. But then there's the other two steps after that. When I'm thinking through those, what are some of the common challenges that come up with those other two steps? Getting your point across, getting on the same page.
One of the challenges is what I call the curse of knowledge. Other people have called it that. The curse of knowledge is that we all have a certain amount of knowledge in our heads, a certain understanding, a certain definition of terms and background. Just purely because of human nature, we tend to assume other people have all that understanding. When we try to communicate, we're assuming way too many things, like everybody has the same definition of terms. Everybody knows what that acronym is. Everybody knows what the implications of it. So the curse of knowledge is one of the biggest problems in communication. And whether it's branding or marketing or leadership or whatever, it's just a human problem. One of the things that in getting the point across that I use all the time is to train yourself to say this when you're introducing a concept. You say what it is you're going to say, and then you say, and what I mean by that is, and then you define it, illustrate it, tell a story about it, use an analogy. You find ways to actually bring more light onto it to make sure that people understand it. We should always assume that somebody is going to misunderstand what we're saying, not because they're stupid or evil. It's because we're distracted. We often listen selectively. We may have completely different definition of terms. And our job as communicators is to ameliorate that up front by simplifying all the time and trying to make it clear to people.
Oh, too many people, too many communicators think that their job is to simply deliver a message. And that's not it.
No,
that's not the goal. The goal is to make sure that the message is fully received and fully understood.
I call that info dumping.
Yeah,
to put a negative on it. You're not communicating. You're not delivering a message. You're info dumping.
That's it.
And anybody that puts up slides in a presentation and the slides are full of 8-point type and data that can't be read or seen, and all you're doing is narrating the slide, you're just an info dumper. You're not a presenter, and you're not communicating. You may as well have just sent the slides and not shown up for all the good it's doing. Just because words have come forth does not mean that communication has happened.
Exactly. I do want to touch on something because this is a mistake that I used to make a lot, and I still find myself making this mistake, and I'll try and correct myself, is whenever I was communicating something, I would deliver the message, and then I would say, does that make sense? And most every time someone would say, yeah, makes total sense.
Yeah.
But I love your approach of taking it further to explain it, to make sure that you're getting the point across by delivering the message and then saying, and by that, I mean, and then explaining it further.
Yeah. I got a little dose of my own medicine a while ago when I had already written the book, and somebody said to me, well, what do you mean by clarity? And I stopped and I said, shoot, have I even ever defined it?
Yeah.
And I had to go back and really rethink what I mean when I say clarity, because I actually mean more than one thing. There are 4 dimensions to clarity. And I had to actually go back and kind of delineate it for myself, because when I say clarity, in certain contexts, I'll actually be meaning different things. So there's clarity of expression, which we've been mostly talking about. How do you say things? But there's also clarity of purpose and direction. Those are the things that help people understand who they are, how they're put together, what their professional destiny should be, what their company purpose is. And it's incredibly important to have that base clarity of understanding of purpose in order to then have clarity of expression. I actually had to go back and eat a little crow and, okay, I better define my terms if I'm going to be the king of clarity, you know?
That's it. Yeah. So earlier before our interview, we were talking about homeschooling, and my wife and I currently homeschool our children with a community. Like, we don't do it all on our own, but in their curriculum is logic. There's a whole course on logic. And that's one of the things they talk about in logic is defining your terms. Whenever you're communicating with somebody, whenever you're debating with somebody, make sure that you define your terms first.
Well, one of the big problems we see in the social arena, in the political arena, is people talking past each other. We're using words, but we don't have the same meanings at all. A lot of the argumentation, disagreement, and hostility that goes on in the public square is because we're careless in the way that we're using words. We're not defining our terms. And so people are assuming the worst of others. They're assuming a different thought process. And it frustrates the daylights out of me. And unfortunately, on social media, I have tried in the past to articulate. I studied philosophy and psychology, and I'm really into that whole thing about clear thinking. It just doesn't fly on social media. Social media is all sound bites and bits and pieces and reactions, and people don't have the patience to actually think about what they're saying. It's a conundrum. You have to be clear and simple, but sometimes you have to be a little more complete in order to make sure that what you think people should be hearing is what they're actually hearing.
Right. And to me, at least the way that I see most of the social media channels, it seems like the majority of people go on social media simply to deliver a message, not to make sure that their message is understood and not to even listen to anybody else's message.
That's why I scaled back a lot on my use of it. I was an early adopter and I used it a lot. And I just saw how fruitless so many of the interactions were and decided, you know what, it isn't worth the aggravation. I use it still to some extent and mostly LinkedIn because most of my stuff was more oriented toward the professional or the business world.
Same.
Yeah. But I got burned enough times to say, you know, I'm not changing anybody's mind. Why am I doing this?
Yeah, that's it. When it comes to clarity, when it comes to ensuring that we have clarity in our communications, you share a number of tools to help us do that and to help us simplify our communications. And one of those is through storytelling.
Yes.
And that's one of the best ways to get our point across is through storytelling and telling stories. But I'm curious, how do people go about using storytelling in the wrong way?
Most people just don't use it enough. I mean, storytelling is wonderful. I think one of the ways in which people use storytelling in the wrong way is they don't have a point. They're telling a story, but you don't know where it's going and you don't know what they're trying to illustrate. They're just telling stories because they want to tell a story. Here in the South, that works pretty well. People like storytelling here in the South. It doesn't work so well in the Northeast. I grew up in Connecticut and I spent 30 years in New Jersey. Storytelling for the sake of storytelling doesn't fly up there.
Right.
And so we have to have some cultural awareness of what's going to work with our audience. When I talk about the clarity formula, I talk about 4 rules, and we talked about those: having a point, get the point across, get on the same page. And then I talk about 8 tools. And one of those, they all start with S. So one of them is storytelling. Stories, the brain, this is again being brain friendly. The human brain likes stories. The human brain likes snippets. Okay, I could tell you the brain's a very busy place. Yeah, okay, fine.
I get that.
11 million bits per second. Okay, there's a specific, there's a snippet, there's a stat. Bing. It sticks in our heads because we like those specifics. And then what are the stakes? And I don't mean T-bone. I mean risk stakes. We respond. So we need to know what's important. And again, that's the RAS is part of that. Clear, simple statements are, again, great for the brain. We don't want a white paper for everything. We want something simple. And one of my favorites is symbolic language, using analogies. Analogies turn the light on like nothing else. If I said to you, Matt, when it comes to simplicity, you're the Joe Rogan of podcasters. What I'm saying is popular, premier, top of the line, great, whatever. But
not so controversial, though.
Yeah, not quite so controversial. But analogies and illustrations and word pictures are some of the most powerful ways. You know, you and I both have in-depth exposure to the writings of the Bible. The Bible is full of parables. It's full of analogies. It's full of word pictures. It's full of stories. Why? Because that's what humans do to communicate. It's much of what I've come up with for the clarity formula is just reading the Bible and seeing how stuff is written that has been communicated. It's been thousands of years. I'm not a rocket scientist. I didn't come up with these things out of whole cloth. They've been around forever. I just systematized it.
That's it. And I think that using those symbols, using analogies and metaphors, that's even more helpful, more valuable when you're trying to communicate a new idea to somebody.
Absolutely.
So if you want a new idea to stick with someone, then tie it to something that they already know and understand.
I have another category, another S category called side-by-sides, where we do comparison and contrast. And what we're doing there is we're taking an existing memory hook. So this is like that, but this is unlike that. So what I've done is I've stolen something that's already in your mind, and I've attached my new concept to it. And it's much easier for you to absorb it and understand it if I take advantage of your existing memory hooks.
Yeah.
Same with analogies. If something's the Mercedes of something, I'm saying in one word, high end, exclusive, top quality, whatever, and without saying it, I just make an analogy. So I think one of the most powerful ways, especially for leaders and executives that are trying to create a culture, create direction, inspire people, use those symbols, use those pictures. That's what gets people going.
It is. And it's helpful to the audience. It makes it so much easier for them. And they appreciate that too.
Oh, absolutely. The fact is, we like simple. We want simple. We want to rally around something that is quickly grasped. And leaders, for good or for ill, have often taken their ideas and encapsulated them in little distilled phrases or images or pictures. And that's what drives a movement.
Speaking of that, in the last part of the book, you talk about different best practices to use across different channels that professionals and business leaders are most used to. One of those that's near and dear to my heart is of course, in branding. So I'm curious, what's your favorite example of non-simple messaging in branding?
The very first marketing blog post, I launched a marketing blog about 15 or 16 years ago. And my very first one was called How to Waste 100,000 Billboards, which I thought was a genius title. And I still think is a genius title. Not bad for an initial blogger. But I was talking about UPS. And
I know
you have a history with FedEx. And I often compare and contrast the two. FedEx has this wonderful little phrase on the side of the trucks, the world on time.
Yes.
I love that phrase. It says everything. It says everything you need to know. We service the world. We get it done on time. And I, as an end user, I understand that. UPS, on the other hand, I have asked, I don't know how many hundreds of people over the years, what is written on the side of a UPS truck? Nobody, and I mean nobody, knows the answer. There's a UPS symbol on the side of the truck.
Yeah.
People will remember a couple of their failed marketing campaigns, like What Can Brown Do For You? Or We Love Logistics. It was horrible. I mean, horrible. But the worst sin is that they have now 130,000 vehicles of all shapes and sizes, from planes to little trucks, with one of two phrases and sometimes both phrases, both of which are absolutely, totally non-memorable. Nobody remembers them. The first one is worldwide services. Now, worldwide is fine. FedEx does the world. Okay, worldwide I'm cool with. Services, though, is a confusing, foggy bucket term. It's a huge thing. There are three major buckets that are awful: products, services, and solutions. People use these terms all the time, and it's totally vague. So nobody remembers that phrase because it doesn't say anything to the regular person. It's not sticky. The second one is worse. Synchronizing the world of commerce. Now, I know what they're getting at. UPS is all about supply chain logistics, all about not only delivering packages in a brown truck to your front doorstep. There's this whole back-end system that they've built, but only 0.00001% of the population executives in supply chain management understand the term synchronizing the world of commerce. And yet they put it on trucks for the common person to see, and not a single person has ever registered that message. Ever.
Olympic swimmers may also fall in that category. They may understand synchronizing.
Well, yeah, they may understand synchronizing in the pool, but the fact is, if I have a UPS truck coming, I want my package.
Yeah.
Give me a message that speaks to me. Don't give me a message that speaks to nobody. And they go around, and they have been for I don't know how many years now, at least 15 or 16 and longer, with these two totally ineffective messages that are being seen by people every single day, multiple times, and never sinks in. It just drives me insane.
It's just one more message that's adding to that fog, all that noise that everyone gets.
Yeah, it's just fog. It's complete confusion. And we can't afford the luxury of being foggy. We don't have the brown truck. We're not a big UPS. So every company in the world has got to find a way to be vivid and simple and aspirational in their brand messaging if they're going to be remembered.
So beyond the branding, a lot of what we've been talking about can be instilled, useful for individuals. Any individual is able to use these lessons. And when I think about a large enterprise or any size company, really, an individual contributor, professional, middle management, they can only do so much as it relates to their communications and communications from their team. But what about the business leaders? What can leaders do to ensure that there's simplicity and clarity across all communications in their organization?
It really is, in many ways, up to the leaders to drive this. And the lowest hanging fruit for me, for any enterprise, any business, actually any small individual or team, the lowest hanging fruit is email.
Yeah.
We all use email. We all get tons of email. We all get very boring emails or overlong emails. And what I tell people is when you understand the need to get to the point, you take the visual real estate that's most important in the email, which is the subject line, the first sentence.
Right.
And you better make that interesting, relevant, RAS friendly. Tell me where this is going and why I should read this. If you wait 4 paragraphs to tell me the point, you've lost me. I've already deleted your email. People skim and delete email boxes. And every single one of us can learn the clarity principles with email. The second lowest hanging fruit is meetings. Yes. Have a distilled summary of where we're going on the agenda, and then create a distilled same page summary at the end, written so that everybody is aligned. If people start doing those two things at every level of the organization, clarity begins to take root. But what leaders have the opportunity to do with the formula in this book, there has, to my knowledge, never been one framework for clear communications across an entire company that everybody can adopt and use the common language. Hey, that wasn't RAS friendly. Hey, you didn't get to the point. You know what? You could use a story or a snippet here. This ought to be this way. I don't think that exists yet, and that's why I wrote this book. I think the real power is if organizations can embed these principles and practices in their presentations, in their executive leadership, all the way down to new hires, all the way down to administrators, it's going to create efficiencies. And there was a study done in 2022, it's referenced in the book, that surveyed a whole bunch of business leaders about miscommunication. And these leaders estimated that their teams are losing about 7.5 hours per week to miscommunication per person. 20% inefficiency in the entire organization. That's inexcusable. How many leaders would say, hey, everybody, you know what, be ineffective all day Wednesday. Just every Wednesday, just be ineffective. No, that's not acceptable. Well, this is a fixable problem. We should be fixing this bread and butter, evergreen, universal problem in our companies from top to bottom.
Put a dollar figure on that or create a snippet or symbol around that. Hey, leaders, it's like you're paying your people to work 5 days a week and no one's coming in on Friday.
Yeah, exactly. And the authors of this study did add that up. And the cost of any organization from 500 people was in the millions. And then the overall cost of the economy was in the trillions. That's a lot of lost time and effort. We don't need fancy AI platforms for this. We just need 4 rules, 8 tools, basic principles, bread and butter stuff. And we can fix a lot of problems.
And it doesn't matter what functional area or what team it is. These 4 rules apply no matter the area that you're in.
A lot of this actually, I developed in doing a course on project management. A lot of the biopharma companies I work with, they bring high potential sales reps in to headquarters, bring them into training, sales training, and they give them projects. Well, they've never been trained in operations. They've never been trained in project. They're salespeople.
Right.
They're just thrown into the deep end of the pool. And I saw so many projects failing that I developed a course that was about project and vendor management, but really it's collaboration skills. I finally realized, this is all collaboration skills. And collaboration skills is a huge part of clear communications. How do we actually get to the point, get everybody on the same page, iterate effectively so we know we have agreement? So a whole bunch of this book really came out of the frustration of seeing bad projects and bad vendor management and figuring out there's got to be a simple way to fix this. There's got to be principles that anybody can apply. And there are.
Yeah. Just applying this in your communications helps solve so many inefficiencies and help save you a lot of money in your company.
Yep. That's the goal. And again, here's the what's in it for me. You're an executive, you're a leader. You want to cut attrition and frustration in your people. You want to be more profitable. You want to be more efficient. You want money to be made better. Let's fix communication.
That's square one. Well, Steve, last question for you. If you were to create a 5-song playlist for The Point, what songs would you include?
Well, I'm old enough to remember Led Zeppelin and their song Communication Breakdown. That would be one of them.
It happens.
And one that's amusing is Jefferson Starship's We Built This City, only because in the foreword of my book, Jay Baer, a gifted and successful marketer and author, he wrote about a lack of clarity with that song because the song talks about we built this city on rock and roll, and he misunderstood it when he was younger to say we built this city on sausage rolls. Yeah. And so we've got this whole foreword about sausage rolls in the book because of We Built This City, which, by the way, is a very annoying song. Simon and Garfunkel's Sound of Silence would be really good because, boy, we could use a little more silence right now as opposed to all the noise.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I bring up in the book is Dave Ramsey and others have used this expression. To be unclear is to be unkind. If we're dumping information, we're making people work. We're frustrating people. That's not kind. Aretha Franklin had a song, RESPECT, respect.
That's right.
Being clear is being respectful of others. It's not just a functional thing. It's not just a profitable thing. It's actually showing kindness. And then finally, Johnny Nash's I Can See Clearly Now. And that deals more with the clarity on that high level of purpose and direction, because that's so huge in personal branding, in company branding, in strategy. You've got to have clear and simple direction if people are going to be aligned to it and run with it. So you want people to see clearly now where they're going, set the GPS so that it actually has a destination.
I love those songs, except for We Built This City. But yes, I like the misheard lyric from Jay Baer of We Built This City on sausage rolls. I could live in that city. Yeah. Steve, I have learned so much from you. I've learned so much from your book, and I've learned a lot from our talk today. But where can people go to learn more?
My website, stevewoodruff.com, and there I discuss the book, the workshops that I do. A lot of my work is workshops, corporate workshops, keynotes, speaking, because many of these principles are well learned and applied in groups, learning in groups and teams. And I love doing those workshops. And then, as I mentioned before, a lot of my social media presence is on LinkedIn. That's where I share articles and share insights and reviews of other books and interact with people a lot on LinkedIn. Have a newsletter there. So those are the two primary places to find me. I have King of Clarity on Facebook, King of Clarity on Instagram. Those are less common. But King of Clarity is the brand I've adopted and using symbolic language, because the fact is people may not remember everything I say about clarity, but they always remember the King of Clarity. And that's the thing. I have stolen that mind share by using a simple, funny, little symbolic piece of language. And to me, that's the ultimate success of branding and messaging, is when you can grab that mental real estate and they can't let go of it.
It's so valuable. When you can figure out your one thing, we can figure out like what's that thing you want to be known for, and then have people actually refer to you by that name.
Yep. Yeah, I say it in my heart, and I sometimes say it out loud when it happens, when somebody says, "Oh yeah, the King of Clarity," and I go, "I win."
Yeah, love that. Cool. Well, Steve, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your time today.
Matt, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
I hope you enjoyed my discussion with Steve Woodruff. You can learn more from him at stevewoodruff.com. And you'll find opportunities to work with Steve through workshops and keynotes to help your team become more effective in their communication and their collaboration. And if you're enjoying the Simple Brand podcast, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. It's going to make it so much simpler for you to get future episodes like the next one featuring Allie Cudby. We're going to be discussing lessons from her latest book, Keep Your Customers: How to Stop Customer Turnover, Improve Retention, and Get Lucrative Long-Term Loyalty. Look, if you want to learn how to grow your brand by not only focusing on keeping your most loyal customers, but also by creating a culture that helps support that, then this episode's for you. So go ahead and subscribe. You'll automatically get Allie's episode as soon as it's live. Until then, keep it simple.